I'm neutral. Somebody asks me whether I believe in deflation or inflation. I say yes. So I want to start with you, Jim. What makes you think the Fed will get out of control? You got 12 votes from the presidents who are elected by business interests. Now, you've got the Fed governors who are all appointed by Obama. They're all Keynesians. I get that. But you got 12 votes on there that will stand up and will be independent. Now, they'll print some, but at some point, won't they say enough?
First of all, as you know, you distinguish between the Board of Governors and the Federal Open Market Committee, which is a subset. And there are a couple of vacancies right now. So that's actually a smaller group. But the answer is, I don't think the Fed will go out and intentionally destroy the currency. I just think they'll do it by accident because they don't understand, as I said before, the statistical properties of risk. Let me give you a couple of reasons why they're going to keep pursuing that. I like to say, it's the difference between dialing a thermostat and working a nuclear reactor. If the house is too warm, you can dial the thermostat down. If it's too cold, you can dial it up. You can dial a nuclear reactor up or down, but if you get it wrong, you have a catastrophic outcome. The problem is the Fed thinks they're dealing with a thermostat, so they'll act in good faith, but they're actually playing with a nuclear reactor. There are a couple of reasons why they're going to go there. There cannot be deflation of the kind that Harry's described. By the way, I completely agree with Harry's analysis. Deflation is the natural state of the world. Left to its own devices, we would be in a highly deflationary period, and that might not be such a bad thing in terms of future growth. So I agree with that, but it will not be allowed to happen for a couple of reasons. Number one, deflation destroys the banking system. The Fed was created to prop up the banks. The Fed's number one mission, number one mandate is to support the banks. People say, if in deflation, the nominal value of debt goes up, banks are creditors, so isn't that good for them? It's good for them up until the moment of default. The problem is the nominal value of the debt goes up so high that people default. Default is an instantaneous wealth transfer from the creditor to the debtor. So the problem goes to the creditor, i.e. the banks, and they are destroyed. So the Fed won't allow it to happen for that reason. The second reason is, the problem is, imagine deflation. So I make a certain amount of money. I go to my boss, I want a raise. He kicks me out of his office, says, are you crazy? But we have deflation of the kind Harry's describing. So the value of goods and services, the price of goods and services go down. That's a real increase in my wealth. In other words, at the same nominal income, I get richer in deflation, just like getting a raise with one difference. The government can tax the raise, but they haven't figured out how to tax the deflation. So there are no capital gains in a deflationary world. So because the government cannot tax the wealth increase from deflation, they can only tax the wealth increase from inflation. That's another reason why they will not allow deflation.
I'm going to jump in here. You're making two assumptions, and I want to push this, and then I'm going to push you. Number one, you're assuming the government actually understands those relationships. I think when you're saying they have their interests, but I don't know that they totally get it. Number two, the amount of debt that gets deflated is massive. Sure. You go back to the equation that you were using. Yep. Okay, the Fed's going to have to put I think, under your equation, trillions on their balance sheet.
Tens of trillions.
Sure.
Tens of trillions.
Okay, I'm trying to be, but you're right. Do you really think they got the cojones to put $10 trillion more on their balance sheet over, say, 3 or 4 years?
There's a limit to what the Fed can do. I just gave you two reasons.
I mean, and if they put $10 trillion on, does it, it's like the tree falling in the forest.
Sure.
Does it really make a sound?
Right. I just gave you a couple of reasons why deflation will not be allowed to occur. Now you're asking the next question, which is, okay, that's their wish list. How are they actually going to do it?
Well,
have that kind of firepower? The answer is yes. What Harry's ignoring, the Fed will soon be a relatively minor player in this. The cleanest balance sheet in the world, and the one that will expand, is the IMF. They have the capacity to create SDRs in unlimited quantities, and they have a pretty clean balance sheet. So the next time the fiscal crisis reaches an acute stage, they'll just flood the zone with SDRs. So you'll get your tens of trillions to prevent what Harry's describing. Harry's got the natural dynamic right.
But SDRs in terms of what?
In terms of asset bubbles need to be deflated. People are in distress. They need to sell assets. Prices will come down. The demographics. Harry's got all that right. What he's missing is force majeure. He is underestimating the capacity of governments through blunt force to dictate the outcome. And if the Fed can't do it, the IMF will.
The IMF gets its money from its members.
No,
the U.S. is not.
That's not correct. They have a printing press. They get their equity from their members. You have the quota and you have the balance sheet. The quota comes from the members. You're absolutely right, John. But they have a printing press. They can print SDRs, hand them out, and they will.
There is a limit to the SDR under their that they can print underneath their mandate. Is it? Is there not?
No. Well, it's governed by the executive committee. The U.S. has the biggest vote. So you get 24 finance ministers in a room, and they can do whatever they want.
So you think the IMF will help finance the U.S.?
I don't think I know, because they're already doing it. They're already going down that road. They printed over $100 billion equivalent of SDRs in 2009. There was so much going on, people kind of missed that. But what they've done is they've tested the plumbing. They've already announced the structure. They've got regional development banks lined up as buyers. They've got multinational corporations lined up as sellers. They've got Goldman Sachs lined up as a market maker. They've got an issuance calendar. They're working on the repurchase agreements. This is all published by the IMF. There's a paper that came out in January 2011. You can take it from their website. It's not secret. The plan is in place, and they will flood the zone with SDRs when the time comes. And that's the antidote to what Harry's describing.
Okay. One last question, and then you can jump in. How do we translate those SDRs into dollars that create inflation?
Because it's just more money. Basically, the IMF has an SDR trading desk. So you take a country like China, they're going to get an allocation of SDRs. Hungary will get SDRs, but Hungary might actually need dollars. So what Hungary could pay off the Austrian banks, or actually convert them to Swiss francs and pay off the Austrian banks. So what Hungary can do is call up the IMF trading desk, say, I'm a seller of SDRs, China's a buyer because they want to get out of dollars. So China will take the Hungarian SDRs, give them dollars, and then Hungary will have the dollars to pay off its creditors.
But its creditors need euros and francs.
Well, you can swap dollars for or euros spot. That's easy. But the point is, can you get the reserves? Can you get the dollars? And the answer is, if you have SDRs, you can get it from China, because China wants the SDRs as a way to diversify their reserves.
Harry?
So you're saying we take a bottle of Viagra and nothing happens, and everybody says, well, that's fine. Are people totally stupid? Are the bond markets, financial markets totally stupid?
It's not sex, it's dynamics.
It takes more and more of a drug to create less effect, especially when everybody's too much in debt. Consumers are too much in debt. Businesses are too much in debt. Governments are too much in debt.
Agreed.
People are not totally stupid. There is a point where people will say enough is enough. You can't borrow infinite amounts of money and put an economy unless it shows effect. Now, the bond markets give governments leeway. The bond markets look and say, look, and that's why they turned on Greece and all these countries. If you're putting stimulus in and they're seeing the economy turn around and your tax revenues turn around, then they say, it's okay. When they don't see that, I'm saying every time they do QE 1, 2, 3, they're going to get less GDP effect. You're going to get, is there a limit to how markets can go up? How high can the Dow go before the bubble bursts? How low can bond rates go? When the Fed and IMF and the ECB put these trillions of dollars in the economy and it is not lent out and is not being lent by the banks, it gets reinvested at high leverage and pushes up everything at one time. That's what they call the risk on trade. How often have you seen gold, oil, silver, commodities, international stocks, U.S. stocks, bonds, corporate bonds, junk bonds, all go up at the same time? Have you seen that in your lifetime? This is bullshit. This is not sustainable. Markets, they're creating such a bubble that the bubble will have to burst. Our housing bubble did not burst because our economy failed. It burst because home prices got too high for young people to buy anymore. Any market will burst if it gets high enough. So one limit, if they keep throwing trillions and trillions, you push up these markets. Next thing you know, the Dow's at 18, 20,000. Gold's at $5,000. Those bubbles are going to burst, and that destroys. How many trillions of dollars of wealth did we show? $20-30 trillion of wealth can disappear like that when a bubble bursts.
Harry?
So are people going to go along with that?
Now, coming back to you. Working with Mr. Rickards' thoughts. I was with we'll call him senior government official with a nice drawl that I talked about yesterday. And we were talking about how you handle the deficit. And he said, well, you put the deficit on a path that gives the Fed cover to print. Looking at a Fed official, he says, and you will print, right? The Fed official goes, the hedge funds at the table go, at the very highest levels of the good guys, They're telling me they're going to print, and they want inflation.
What's the Fed's stated inflation target? Do you remember what it is?
The 2%.
So can they keep printing if inflation is at 5,
Bullshit.
6, 7%?
Well, they're
going to look pretty stupid.
You're right, but I think they're willing to look stupid to get to, the numbers that we were talking about were 4 to 5. Can they create 4 to 5%?
They are stupid, okay? These people don't know shit about anything. Our economy is not on a thermostat. Economy is like a human being. It needs to grow. It needs to inhale. It needs to exhale.
Can they create
the
4 to 5%
innovations and efficiency come on the exhale. You don't have long-term growth. You can't set an economy at 3% growth and never have a slowdown. They're violating every principle of natural and free markets that have worked for centuries and forever. And my prediction is sooner or later, and I think sooner, they are going to fail because they don't understand what they're doing. These people don't know shit about anything.
Okay. I think I'll agree.
And the fact that these guys would sit there and vow and say that, they should be kicked in the ass and they should be hung on Wall Street because they're idiots.
I totally
agree. Idiots fail in what I've learned.
I agree.
But it may take a while.
It has nothing to do with, we're dealing with reality here of whether they have their
No, people can revolt. People can riot. They're already rioting in Europe.
Well, they're rioting in Europe, but nobody's really paying
81% economists just say the Fed shouldn't do a damn another thing. They've done way too much already. 81% of economists. And they don't know anything about anything.
But they're going to do something. Question, can they
create... They will do it until it fails.
Can they create 4 to 5% inflation? If they want to.
We got M3 growing at 4% right now. I think you do QE3, I think you're going to get 4, 5, 6% inflation. And then that makes it look like the Fed debated severely even doing a QE3 in this time frame until bond yields got pushed so far down by the flight of quality from Europe. They debated that because they were worried about inflation on the other side.
Is 4 to 5% inflation what you think about? When you say we're going to have inflation, is 4 to 5% what you think, or are you thinking 10, 15, or are you thinking the return of Jimmy Carter?
I think it's going to. What's going to happen is the Fed says 2, they're shooting for 4. They'll get the 4, and then it'll gap up to 9 or 10. The thing is, money printing.
Now, is the economy going to grow in that scenario?
Not.
Then they fail. If the economy doesn't grow, you have 10% inflation. They failed, and people are going to say, "Guess what? You guys failed. We're not voting for you. You're not supporting you anymore. If we have to riot in the streets." To make the point,
Did we riot 1970s? I happen to have been in the generation that was rioting at that time. I went into the streets.
Yeah, young people. It's the young people who get killed by this.
I don't ever remember rioting about. And by the way, I wore a tie to my first riot. My speaking fee today is I get an obscene amount of money to speak. I charge an extra $5,000 to wear a tie. I have not had an offer yet. But you can keep the tie. So I was a polite rioter, but it was about Vietnam and other stuff that we cared about back then. I don't ever once remember rioting or going into the streets about Fed policy and inflation.
Well, they're rioting in Europe right now.
But not about ECB policy. They're rioting about austerity.
Listen to
this. Thing.
Who is gaining from this inflationary policy? I'll tell you who. The money's going straight to the banks, keeping them from going under. The ones that created this damn crisis, and the top 1%, a lot of people in this room, that did so well from the bubble, they're getting all the benefits. The middle class is getting nothing here. Their home price is not coming back. Their mortgage is not getting written down to real value. They're underwater, and they see no prospects. The baby boomers are staying in the workforce longer because they can't retire. The young people can't get a job. 50% unemployment in Spain. People leaving Spain. People leaving countries. Young people will riot at some point. It's the young people that riot, not the old people. The old people are sitting on assets praying